There's a little known fact about The Lord of the Rings that I've always been fascinated by. Yes, this is an Elder Scrolls video, and I promise it's going to tie back into Bethesda's universe. The author, J.R.R. Tolkien, had actually started a sequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was titled The New Shadow. Ultimately, it was scrapped in favor of simply closing out the story, and most of the specifics that come from those drafts are irrelevant to my point. But an important takeaway is that this story took place over 200 years after the return of the king. At this point, the atrocities of Sauron and his evil forces were well in the past. However, in the Fourth Age, in the city of Gondor, it was almost like everyone forgot how horrible things were during the War of the Ring. Children would run around and pretend to be orcs. Sympathizer groups to the Dark Lord were on the rise in Middle-earth. Cults met in secret and gave praise to Sauron. Tolkien made it a point to emphasize that as time goes on, people are quick to forget, or rather, they have selective memory. The current citizens of Gondor weren't around to experience the horrors of the Dark Lord's army, so they're quick to joke about it, make fun of it, and even yearn for the change that the Dark Lord vowed to bring on. This setup hits pretty close to a quest in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and of course, that quest is the topic for today's discussion. Pieces of the Past is Mehrunes Dagon's Daedric quest. It's full of adventure, curiosity, and of course, Tamriel's dark history. So, I'll begin by playing through the quest, listening to the dialogue, and detailing some of my experiences. Then, at the end, I'll discuss any lore, theories, messages, and themes. The quest, Pieces of the Past, becomes accessible to the player as soon as their character hits level 20. While wandering around Skyrim, a courier will approach the Dragonborn and hand them a note. They'll mention that it's regarding some new museum in Dawnstar. Opening up the museum pamphlet, it reads, Silus Vesuvius presents the Museum of the Mythic Dawn, a history of the cult that toppled the Septim dynasty, inside of his very own home in the great capital of the Pale, Dawnstar, free and open to all citizens of Skyrim. While several of the in-game NPCs will give a history lesson on the Mythic Dawn, players who are familiar with the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion should know this cult well. They were once feared and hated by pretty much all of Tamriel, and now they get a museum opened in their honor. Traveling to Dawnstar and venturing to the northern shores, the player will get a proper view of Silus's home, aka the museum. Its tattered banners that once belonged to the Mythic Dawn could be seen flapping in the wind. Standing atop the stairs, a man clad in ominous red robes can be seen bickering with Dawnstar's court sorceress, Medina.
Your ancestors wouldn't want this, Silus.
Why should I hide from it? This is my family's legacy.
It's the past. Dead oaths on dead lips. Let it stay there.
The museum is opening, Medina.
Curious, you approach the sorceress and get the scoop.
I beg you, don't go into Silus's museum. Silus comes from one of the oldest families in Dawnstar. They have a complicated history. Several of his ancestors belonged to the Mythic Dawn, the cult that almost destroyed Tamriel. His family's involvement was only found out well after the crisis had died down, but it still ruined their reputation. They were outcasts. And now Silus is back, and this museum to the Mythic Dawn is his way of trying to rebuild his family's pride. It's misguided. Not a student of history, I see. It's for the best. They're a group that should be forgotten. The only thing you need to know is that they almost destroyed the world, and they were stopped a long time ago.
Through that, you learn that the man in red, Silus, has a chip on his shoulder, a shunned family that's seeking redemption, only they're going about it in a very strange way. Instead of forsaking his family's past, Silus chooses to embrace it. He's attempting to make the Mythic Dawn relevant again, and clearly, by the looks of his museum, he wants everyone in Dawnstar to know that he's not ashamed of it.
And here comes my first visitor. The Museum of the Mythic Dawn is open, friend. And here you are. Good. Come in, browse the display and let's talk. I have a job you look perfect for. Let's talk inside.
Right off the bat, the Imperial sizes up the Dragonborn and sees that they can be of use. This conversation is actually what spurs on Pieces of the Past, as before, it was simply a miscellaneous quest to visit the museum.
Feel free to look around. Come talk to me when you're ready to discuss that job I mentioned.
Entering Silus's home, his quote, museum only has a few exhibits to it. However, they do all play important roles in Cyrodiil's history. Approaching each case, Silus gives you the guided tour.
The tapestries hung here and outside were found in hideouts, where members of the Mythic Dawn would meet and plot. The cult's greatest accomplishment was the assassination of the Septim Dynasty and the opening of the Oblivion Gates. Those robes were worn during the Mythic Dawn's secret meetings, where they plotted to bring the Daedra Mehrunes Dagon into Tamriel. Each bolt of yarn used to make the robe was colored with a dye, made from sacrificial blood. That burned paper is all that remains of the fabled Mysterium Xarxes, the blasphemous book written by Mehrunes Dagon himself. It's said that Mankar Cameron used the book to open a portal to a paradise, where all his followers would live forever. The commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes were written by the Mythic Dawn cult leader, Mankar Cameron. He promised a paradise awaited his followers when they died, that they would be reborn by Mehrunes Dagon's side. Ah, yes, that scabbard. Notice the insignia? An Oblivion Gate, a key symbol of Mehrunes Dagon, the patron Daedra of the Mythic Dawn.
Each of these relics had a huge part to play in Tamriel's destiny. For those who are iffy on the details, I'll go over each artifact after the quest is over. In the meantime, after the Dragonborn has finished having a look around and admiring or loathing each historical piece, they can turn back to Silus and ask further questions.
Did you have any questions about the museum, or would you rather talk business? They were worshippers of Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Lord of Destruction and Change. The Mythic Dawn killed Uriel Septim VII and his heirs, triggering the events that led to the Oblivion Crisis when the Daedra invaded Tamriel. All that remains of the infamous cult I've gathered in my museum. Ah, an excellent question. Mehrunes Dagon is the Daedric Lord of Change, Destruction, and Ambition. Dagon's Mythic Dawn cult killed the Septim Dynasty and opened the Oblivion Gates into Tamriel. They called it the Oblivion Crisis. It's no secret that my family were once members of the Mythic Dawn. One of my forefathers was even chosen to assassinate Uriel Septim himself. We hid from our past for years, became tradesmen, people of coin and influence. But I realized that the Mythic Dawn's importance, our importance, to history cannot be denied. I'll see everyone in Tamriel remember that for a moment, we held the fate of the world in our hands, for good or ill.
While it doesn't seem that Silus fully believes his family and the cult were in the right, he does make it seem as though his stance is neutral. He seems to celebrate and relish in the power and influence they once had, and given what their crimes were, I'd say that he's in the wrong here. Whether for the better or worse, his aim is to bring admiration and recognition back to this long-lost cult. Curious as to where this goes from here, the player can then get into the aforementioned job.
A little history first. After the Oblivion Crisis, a number of groups cropped up dedicated to wiping out the remnants of the Mythic Dawn. One of these groups found Mehrunes' razor, the artifact of Dagon. They split it into 3 fragments and pledged to keep them apart forever. That was almost 150 years ago, and the pieces are still being kept by the descendants of that group, and they're right here, in Skyrim. At least 2 of the owners, Gunzel and Draskua, are dangerous marauders, and the 3rd owner, Jorgen, I only know he lives in Morthal. Here are my notes about them. I'll gladly pay you for getting the pieces any way you can. No questions asked.
There are obviously some missing pieces of information here. How did the razor end up in the hands of an unknown group who are now in Skyrim? How did it leave the hero of Kvatch's possession? Those questions actually have some answers to them in the book that Silus had just given you, The Keepers of the Razor. However, for lore's sake, I'll do a read over it after all is said and done.
The razor is Mehrunes Dagon's personal artifact. It has always heralded bloody change and carnage. It's held many names. Dagger of the Final Wounds, Bane of the Righteous, the Kingslayer. The Mythic Dawn worship Dagon as a god. Having his razor would be invaluable to my collection.
From here, the Dragonborn has their work cut out for them. Leaving Silus's museum and opening the world map, you'll see that 3 different locations have been marked. These are where the 3 fragments are being held, each by a different owner. The order of which you obtain them doesn't really matter. 2 of them involve crawls through dungeons, while the third is based more around skill. So, starting with the third one first, the hilt of Mehrunes' razor is currently in the possession of Jorgen in the city of Morthal. Or rather, the lumberjack has the hilt in a chest in his cabin. Many moons ago, while embarking on other adventures through this town, Jorgen was actually slain in my playthrough. A dragon had bested him, and I remember thinking, hopefully he doesn't play a role in any of the quests. Well, here you go. If for whatever reason Jorgen is absent in your playthrough, that makes taking the hilt more straightforward. Lami, Jorgen's wife, might still be around, but she's usually away from her house during the day. Picking their cabin's novice lock, the fragment is in Jorgen's adept chest. Securing the hilt, you can either travel back to Dawnstar and hand it to Silus right away, or you could continue with collecting the rest of the pieces.
What is it? Do you have one of the razor fragments? Did you try the grip? Isn't it eerie how it seems to mold itself into your hand? Here's your gold. We just need the pommel and the shards of the blade now.
Now, let's say that Jorgen is still alive in your game. You can still go ahead with the heist, or for more added lore, you can speak with the lumberjack and get his perspective on the hilt.
Don't know what you're talking about, stranger. I've heard of him. My father had suspicions about his connection to the Mythic Dawn. Guess they were true. I don't need this. My family wasted 8 generations keeping that razor safe from a dead cult. As far as I care, it can stay locked in my house. I don't care, but my ancestors do. You can't have it. You want to fight? You got it.
If all else fails, like it did for me, a good old-fashioned fistfight tends to resolve the world's problems. Clobbering Jorgen, he willingly surrenders everything that generations of his family have worked for to keep hidden.
Damn it, why'd you have to walk into Morthal? Fine. The hilt is in the chest inside my house. Here are the keys. Take that damn thing and go.
Again, through his dialogue, you can see that Jorgen doesn't even really know what it is that he's protecting. All he knows is that this hilt has been passed down from parent to child, and that his ancestors worked hard to ensure that its presence remained a secret. Does he know that this is a fragment of Mehrunes' razor, and that the Mythic Dawn have been searching for it? Well, it sounds like he does, yeah. Although, has the overall seriousness of his duty faded, and has he started to have doubts about keeping this heirloom in the family? I'd also argue, yes. Either way, flipping a coin for the next location, the quest brings the player to a fort called Cragtusk Keep. This dungeon is just west of Falkreath and right down the road from the old Dark Brotherhood sanctuary. For the most part, its occupants are orc hunters and bandits. The guards and warriors around the exterior are nothing to worry about. Anyone who's over level 20 should have no issues with clearing the outside. Now, inside Cragtusk Keep is where the battle can get tricky. There are only 3 NPCs you'll have to deal with. 2 of them happen to be more bandits and hunters, so no need to worry there. However, the third is this aforementioned Gunzel. Gunzel is the protector of Mehrunes' razor's blade. He too is an orc bandit, only he's clad in Nordic carved armor, wields a 2-handed enchanted battle axe, and knows how to hit really hard. If you're lucky, he may say, looking for the blade, you aren't the first. Otherwise, he gets straight into swinging, and it's up to the Dragonborn to respond. As soon as the leader has been defeated, the rest of the search is fairly straightforward. On his person, Gunzel has a key to the Cragtusk Vault. Taking it, the player can head back down the main chamber of the keep, and this time, travel through the doorway on the western wall. This leads you through more corridors until finally, you hit a roadblock. Accessing the cage beside it, you can easily open it up via Gunzel's key. Activating the button, the metal bars retract into the ground, and the Dragonborn can make their descension to the vault. Down here, the orcs kept some basic supplies along with stashes of gold and weaponry. At the back of the hall, there are more bars that are meant to keep you out. However, simply pulling the 2 nearby levers lowers them, and it's onto the final chamber of Cragtusk. The back of the room holds the second fragment of Mehrunes' razor. Leading up to it, though, are various traps, albeit they are pretty obvious and easy to trigger. Successfully getting past them, the player can secure the blade and return to Silus for your reward.
It's strange holding a hilt that isn't connected to a dagger. Oh well. Look at them. The legendary sharpness of a Daedric weapon. Marvelous. And here's your payment for the shards. There's only the pommel left to collect. Exciting, isn't it?
I didn't call it out before, but with each successful find, the player is rewarded with a leveled amount of gold. While handy, it's nothing compared to the end result of this quest. The final location for the final fragment of Mehrunes' Razor is Dead Crone Rock. This dungeon is in the far west reaches of Skyrim. It's southwest of Markarth and deep into Forsworn territory. Now, doing this quest, I sort of got this funny feeling. Obviously, very few Daedric quests are seen as good and beneficial for the masses. They typically involve some dark, twist, or wicked detail that can turn one's stomach. While this mission is far from over, it certainly feels like, so far, I'm doing the wrong thing. Sure, you could argue that Silus wants these pieces collected for the sake of history, and that apart from Jorgen, each owner is hostile and therefore bad in their own right. However, for 150 years, this group that's dedicated themselves to erasing the Mythic Dawn from history have been doing their due diligence and have kept the pieces of the blade separate. Collecting all the fragments and reuniting them again just feels wrong, like it's a step forward for the Mythic Dawn and Mehrunes Dagon. I can't help but wonder how NPCs like Joffrey, Boris, Martin, Uriel Septim, Mankar Cameron, and even the Hero of Kvatch would feel about my mission. I'm essentially bringing up a legacy that they, and many others after them, worked hard at tearing down. This also includes this militia that's been upholding their duties for 150 years, as well as 8 generations of their family tree. Either way, conscience to the side for now, Dead Crone Rock is a Forsworn encampment. For some reason, the quest marker will guide you into one of the area's keeps, Hag Rock Redoubt Ruin. Running through this ruin is not necessary. In fact, it's considered to be the long way around. The dungeon holds various Forsworn NPCs like foragers and looters. In fact, in its upper section, it even has a Briarheart for the player to face off against. These are of course the most challenging variants of the Forsworn, sitting right below the Hagravens. Once the Briarheart has been dealt with, the ruin spits the Dragonborn back out into Skyrim. This is essentially where you could have ended up if you had just continued to follow the path outside. However, there were and still are more Forsworn for you to deal with. This includes another Briarheart and an unaffiliated troll, certainly a random creature to find at their camp, but there have been stranger ones before. The exterior of the ruin continues to lead the Dragonborn up the mountainside, until finally they land at the mandatory keep, Dead Crone Rock. Inside, it's a brief crawl through more narrow hallways and small chambers. There are a handful more of the Forsworn in here, but no Briarhearts or anything of that concern. Opening up one of the side passageways, the player now has free access back out into Skyrim and up into the top of Dead Crone Rock. As it would turn out, the third owner of a Mehrunes' Razor fragment is a Hagraven. This is Drasqua. She's placed at level 20 and has fairly common stats for a Hagraven. Her spells and casts can prove deadly, so it's often best to close out the fight as quickly as possible. Again, similar to Gunzel, if you're lucky, Drasqua will share her one and only dialogue bit. "You won't take my eye, man-thing." Given that she's the keeper of the pommel, a small black orb, I think it's safe to presume that that's what she's referring to here. With Drasqua dead, the Dragonborn can claim the final fragment of the Razor and return to Silus. However, before doing so, there are a few points of interest here. There are soul gems, a boss-level chest, and of course, a word wall. This wall reveals one of the words of power for the Dismay Shout.
Our master craftsmen are nothing compared to the perfection of the Daedra. Look how it shines. Here's your gold, as promised. Finally, all the pieces of Mehrunes' Razor are in my hands. It's time I let you in on something. There's a fourth piece, that scabbard in the display case, built to house the Razor, and there's more. I know how to put all the pieces together. We just need to take them to Dagon's shrine and contact the Lord of Change directly. Ever since I was a boy, I felt this strange sense of destiny surrounding the Mythic Dawn cult, and now I know what it is. Don't you see? Fate has led you to me and to the pieces. Dagon has to answer our call. We're so close. I'll meet you at the shrine.
It's funny how this was meant to be a surprise for the player. You mean to tell me that Silus wants to reforge this blade, the one he spent years looking for and serves as a great importance to his sadistic cult? Color me surprised. The Daedric Prince's shrine is located southwest of the Lordstone, well into the mountains east of Morthal. Listen, if I've learned anything from the Daedric Princes, It's that there are no free handouts. Sure, you'd be returning Mehrunes Dagon's artifact to him, but it doesn't mean he owes you anything. In fact, to ask the Prince of Destruction for a favor, I'm more than certain that won't end well for the parties involved.
Good, you're here. I'll place the pieces on the altar, and Dagon should speak to us. Mehrunes Dagon, the Lord of Change. We have brought your razor to you. We beg you, please, bring the blade's full glory to Tamriel again. It's not working. Why don't you give it a try? Just put your hands on the altar.
Again, I don't think what happens next will come as a surprise to anyone.
You, mortal, you are worthy of speaking to. You have claimed the pieces of my razor. It has been an amusing game to witness. But Dagon does not declare a winner while there is a pawn on the board. Kill Silus. He and his family have served their purpose. Kill him. Take your rightful place as my champion, or I will crush you.
Wait, don't kill me. There's another way. I can take the pieces back to my museum, seal them in a display case. You get a generous amount of gold, I get to complete my collection, and nobody has to die.
Not all, but some of the Daedra quests offer the player a choice. In the end, when you're asked to perform a vile and heinous act, you can decide whether or not you'd like to go through with it. This is one of those moments. I'll of course be exploring both outcomes. So, first up is sparing Silus.
Thank you. Here's your gold. I'll make a run for it back to Dawnstar.
You think to betray Mehrunes Dagon. Suffer.
Even though the player chooses to stay their hand, that doesn't mean that Mehrunes Dagon needs to as well. As a demonstration of his lordship, the Prince of Change summons 2 Dremora Kinreaves. While pettiness can be the in-game reason for his actions, further rewarding the player is Bethesda's. Your character's level is what dictates the type of Dremora that gets spawned in. For this quest, Kinvolls would be the weakest variants as they start to appear at level 19. Either way, Dremora are skilled fighters and in pairs can prove to be deadly foes. Once they've been slain, however, you'll find a key to Dagon's shrine in their inventory. This leads you through the mysterious doorway that's just below the monument to Dagon. I'll be wandering through there in the next ending, but for now, it's best to return to Dawnstar to check on Silus. The Imperial is certainly a lot less bold now that his life was seen as forfeit by Mehrunes. He recycles the same sentences, saying that he's lucky to be alive, he owes you his life, and that the razor is your shared secret. His museum is still open, and all of the exhibits are still there, including the 4 components of the dagger. However, with the artifact in pieces and locked away, this officially forfeits the player's right to ownership. You'll never know what it was like to wield that kind of power. With this ending, the player is a couple hundred septims richer, Mehrunes' razor is dormant, and the Mythic Dawn's name has come back to the surface. Now, reverting back, the Dragonborn can see what the other side of the story's like. Let's just say that Silus was right on one thing. Fate did play a hand in introducing him to the Dragonborn.
Fine. I'm not dying without a fight.
According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, Vesuvius' level will be 3/4 of the player's overall level. His minimum level though would be 20 and the maximum would be 30. Silus is a destruction mage, meaning that it's best you deal with him swiftly, especially if you're a melee fighter. Once the alleged last member of the Mythic Dawn has been executed, the player can speak once more with Mehrunes Dagon for their true reward.
I am pleased, mortal. I will give you my razor. Use it to wreak havoc on Tamriel. You have been a worthy tool. Fill the world with destruction in my name. Place your hands on my altar one last time, and you will witness the power of Mehrunes Dagon for yourself.
Activating the altar, the 4 pieces of the razor come together. In moments, the blade gets reforged, practically as if it's brand new.
Before you go, mortal, one final challenge.
The Dremora get spawned in regardless. One outcome sees them as Dagon's spitefulness, and the other as his deceiving nature. Either way, they're really there to ensure that you receive a key to his inner shrine. Now, as for Mehrunes' razor itself, it's of course a dagger, limiting its reach and base damage. However, that not only gets made up for with its attack speed and unique appearance, but also its one-of-a-kind enchantment. The description is simple. Hits have a small chance to instantly kill. Really, that's about it. In Oblivion, on top of Daedric Banishment, the razor also had a disintegrate armor effect. Unfortunately, it appears as though the dagger has been nerfed in Skyrim. Well then, you might be asking, what are the odds of it insta-killing? According to the wiki, there's a 1.98% chance that your target will die right away. About the same as a vanilla character in Oblivion wielding the blade, only there's no luck multiplier to help boost those odds. Even though it is a really neat dagger and could prove useful to those who are feeling lucky, I wouldn't personally wield it as my go-to weapon. In any case, part 2 of the reward comes from within the shrine. Going through the ancient doors, it leads the player to an icy corridor. This pathway winds and twists until it lands at a small chamber. This area serves as a treasury, or a long-lost offering area from the Mythic Dawn. There are 2 more Dremora in here that you'll have to face, but they tend to be lower-leveled ones. These are respawning Daedra and can be used to farm otherwise expensive Daedra hearts. As for the room, it contains gold ingots, ebony ingots, soul gems, potions, enchanted weapons and armor, and a few containers, including a boss-level chest. This is an excellent area to procure the materials needed for Daedric and ebony smithing. With that, this version of Pieces of the Past comes to an end. Silus Vesuvius is dead, meaning that he can no longer spread the word of the Mythic Dawn's deeds. His museum will lay dormant until the people of Dawnstar reclaim his home and likely tear it down. In the end, the player gets to keep Mehrunes' razor and can wield an all-new type of power. Alright, now that the quest is over, there's a good bit of housekeeping to do. For starters, let's take a closer look at each of the 4 exhibits in Silus's museum. Obviously, with the razor in the player's inventory, the display case on the eastern wall is empty. In fact, it can't even be interacted with, so it might as well be as good as a rock. However, turning our attention to the western display case, this one holds all of the Mythic Dawn garb. 2 robes, 1 pair of gloves, and 1 pair of boots. All 3 robes, counting Silus's, have the same enchantment. Magicka regenerates 75% faster. Technically, this is an upgrade from Oblivion's version, which had no natural enchantments, so that's an upside. The boots and gloves, on the other hand, are blank slates. While appearing lackluster at first, this does allow for the player to apply their own enchantments. In my opinion, more customization is never a bad thing. Moving along to the final 2 display cases on the northern wall, there's the singular, torn-out page of the Mysterium Xarxes. Unfortunately, nothing can be done with this dangerous and mysterious artifact. Honestly, it was one of the only ones in here that really caught my eye. This little page was what the heroes of the late 3rd era fought and died for. It played an incredible role in Mankar Cameron's plan for world domination. It also played a major role in thwarting said plan, so it has its complicated history. Unfortunately, nothing can be done with this dangerous and mysterious artifact. There's no way to interact with it. However, what's interesting is that this is one of the 2 pages we actually get to see in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Maybe it's even the one that tells the reader how to open portals to pocket realms of Oblivion, although I doubt it. To be honest, I think this relic, along with practically all the other ones in this room, were more so meant to be fanfare, a nice, fun little callback to the previous game in the series. Then, the final exhibit is the 4 volumes of commentaries on the Mysterium Xarxes. These are more or less the ramblings of a madman. It's Mankar Cameron's interpretation of Dagon's scripture, but honestly, it's no more legible than the Trader's Diary. Their main purpose was to guide the hero of Kvatch to a secret waypoint. Using the first letter of each paragraph, it spelt out Green Emperor Way where tower touches midday sun. I was glad to see that they still emphasize that secret passage here in Skyrim. Unfortunately, beyond that, there isn't much more to say on these exhibits and collections. These items were once powerful and spread fear throughout the continent. Each played a role in toppling the Septon Dynasty and near-world destruction. Now, they're nothing more than display pieces at an obscure museum in the far reaches of Skyrim. Alright, now let's move on to the Keepers of the Razor. This was the book that Silus handed to the Dragonborn at the beginning of the quest. It helps to shed light on some of those aforementioned questions. Which anti-Mythic Dawn group got a hold of the Razor? How did it end up in Skyrim, and who exactly were its former protectors? Well, the book starts off by listing the current owners of the fragments, Jorgen, Gunzel, and Draskua. It then goes through their family history, checking off every previous owner of the respective piece. Each family tree goes back 8 generations. Likely, these were the first members of said Mythic Dawn hate group that took the razor and broke it into pieces. For example, on Jorgen's side, there's Jorgen, Halnir, Hroi, Koli, Malti, Ligerlead, Nedrir, and Len. The book, Keepers of the Razor, is split into 4 sections. The first is the family lineages, or as the header puts it, current descendants of the Inner Circle. Now, the following 3 sections fall under historical background. The group who successfully took possession of Mehrunes Razor have dubbed themselves Keepers of the Razor. However, the book says that their original name was much different and unfortunately lost to time. The Keepers were a militia group dedicated to wiping out the remnants of the Mythic Dawn. While the group had undergone changes to their identity and purpose 150 years ago, I think it's safe to assume that the Keepers were around since the dawn of the 4th era. After all, that would have been the height of the Mythic Dawn manhunts. Either way, Silus goes on to explain that he's unsure how the group managed to find and secure Mehrunes Razor. There are no records of them until year 50 of the 4th era. Furthermore, Silus explicitly calls out Frothendrothin's failed expedition to Sundercliff Watch and Varsabalum, the very same one that was tied to the Mehrunes Razor plugin for Oblivion. Connecting the lines here, the Hero of Kvatch was the one to retrieve the artifact from the dungeon. They took possession of the dagger and likely held onto it for quite some time. While I don't think Bethesda can make every event in the Elder Scrolls 4 canon, they do appear to be hinting at something here. This is just my thinking, but to me, it sounds like they're saying that the previous protagonist either willingly surrendered this blade to the militia, or that it was scavenged from their belongings. Obviously, at some point, the Hero of Kvatch would have had to die, pass on, ascend, descend, whatever your headcanon is. Assuming it was death though, their possessions, items, and property would have been forfeit. Maybe the militia were able to piece things together, track down the hero's corpse, and take the dagger. Or, knowing that they were doing the right thing, the hero willingly handed the blade over to an anti-Mythic Dawn group, knowing it'd be safest there. Of course, worth mentioning is the story that the Hero of Kvatch continued to mantle the Mad God, Sheogorath. From there, maybe a similar story can be told. In some twisted or peaceful way, the blade was gifted to the militia by Uncle Sheo, Haskell, or his many servants. Either way, I'd like to think that Bethesda was alluding to the Hero of Kvatch during that gap in the group's history. Moving along, the 3rd paragraph of the book talks about how the Razor was divided among the 3 highest ranking members, or the Inner Circle. Then the blade was to be passed down to their eldest child, who then would have given it to their eldest child, so on and so forth. Apparently, their pact was that this was to be done until, quote, the twin moons disappear. Interestingly, Silus calls out a couple of celestial phenomena in the past century where this actually happened. The moons were gone. However, he believes that the wording is not to be taken literally and now assumes that it just means until the end of time. See, obviously the Razor can be seen as a token artifact for the Mythic Dawn, and keeping it out of the public eye is probably for the best. Plus, it's a weapon that belongs to a malevolent deity and has a truly sinister enchantment. In the wrong hands, this dagger can be very destructive. However, I'd argue that in Oblivion's plot, it doesn't even play that big of a role, if any, at all. The Mythic Dawn didn't seem to care about its whereabouts. They weren't even looking for it at Varsabalum, nor did they ever mention it during the main quest. I almost think it'd be more worth it for the Keepers to focus their efforts on reclaiming the page of the Mysterium Xarxes, the Mythic Dawn's Bible. This to me feels like it holds a lot more power and influence over the cult. The dagger is a nice display piece and it's certainly powerful, but in the wrong hands, the Mysterium Xarxes can bring about world domination. The 4th and final paragraph for the text talks about the current owners of the Razor. They proved difficult for Silus to track down. One can only imagine how tricky it is to locate the top members of a secretive, undocumented organization. It's said that Len, Jorgen's forefather, was the true leader of the Keepers. However, given that he was a part of Clan Axebearer, a tribe that dates as far back as the early 2nd century, it wasn't too difficult to trace their family tree to Hanlir's eldest son, Jorgen. As for the other 2 members, Gunzel and Draskua, they were apparently even less documented. However, Silus clearly had success when it came to locating them. Uthmash Grogullers, Gunzel's forefather, the original member of the Inner Circle, along with his sons, had served as legionnaires for the Empire. While it isn't stated how or why Gunzel broke away from military service and took up arms with bandits, he at least still kept up with his family oath. As for Draskua, I find her story the most fascinating. She was born to daughters of the Reach. Sorcha's lineage, her foremother and original member of the Inner Circle, could only be traced through Markarth's tax records. According to Silus's final note, Drasqua was forced to flee after the Markarth incident, and is considered by the Jarl to be an extremely dangerous threat. Obviously, Drasqua is a bit of an outlier compared to Jorgen and Gunzel. She's a hagraven, a sick and vile monster. However, this stirs up a few questions regarding her oath to the Keepers and her personal timeline. Given the date of the Markarth incident and the current year of the Elder Scrolls, here's my theory on Drasqua. At first, I assumed that she had performed the ritual and transformed into a hagraven sometime after she had landed at Dead Crone Rock. However, now I'm not so sure. Given Silus's wording in his notes, it sounded like at some point, Drasqua lived in Markarth. I thought, why would they let a hagraven stay within the city's limits? And then, I remembered what the Markarth incident entailed. For 2 or so years, the Forsworn had occupied the capital of the Reach. This would have included all of its members, the Briarhearts and the Hagravens. Therefore, Drasqua would have been allowed to occupy land within Markarth. Once the western city was taken back by Ulfric, she then would have been forced to flee. However, at some point in her life, she would have been handed the pommel of the Razor. I think this would have occurred pre-transformation, and even after becoming a monster, she still upheld her family's oath. How and who Drasqua would have handed the pommel down to is anyone's guess. Maybe there's a daughter or son who we don't know about, or perhaps it was going to be buried with her when the time came. That part of the story will never get to be told. And that's about it for the Keepers of the Razor text. Honestly, I find this book to be extremely fascinating. It's one of the few texts that links the Dragonborn to the Oblivion Crisis. It's a piece of lore that connects Oblivion to Skyrim. We get to see the Mythic Dawn again, and we hear about the aftermath of the conclusion for the 4th installment. Rarely do we get much information on the what happened next factor. In saying that, I'm referring to the events that took place right after the main story of an Elder Scrolls game. It's a small peek behind the curtain that I think many fans wanted to experience. In the beginning of this video, my whole introduction was geared around some of Tolkien's thoughts and ideas. Given enough time, people will always forget and make light of terrible events. The new Shadow demonstrates that perfectly. The people of Gondor hardly remember the terrors of Sauron and his evil army. Because of that, the children roleplay as orcs, and some of the adults yearn for the return of the Dark Lord. A different age, a different ruling regime. While I won't call them out, we often see the same thing happen with our own world's history. New generations come, their understanding and experiences with these atrocities are minimal, and they then turn them into a lighthearted subject. To wrap everything up, this is exactly what happened with Silus Vesuvius and the Mythic Dawn. After the Oblivion Crisis, the cult was hated. They were hunted down across the continent. Only select members survived, and they lived in fear and or had shunned their ancestors. Now, here we are, 200 years later. In order to prop his family's legacy back up, Silus opens a museum dedicated to the Mythic Dawn's deeds. He dons their robes and professes his appreciation to their cause. Everyone around him is saying that this is a bad idea, but of course he doesn't listen. He's so caught up with legacy, meaning, and purpose that he has no clue how in over his head he is. That's one of the reasons why I find this quest so interesting and entertaining. That, and of course the fact that it features the antagonistic cult from my favorite Elder Scrolls game. Plus, it was the first Daedric quest I ever did in Skyrim, so I've got my nostalgia goggles on. I'd love to know everyone's thoughts down below on the quests, pieces of the past, and until next time, keep on adventuring.